When the HOA bulldozed my dreams into an asphalt jungle, I turned their pristine community into a stink-filled rebellion. Can one woman's quest for justice really uproot entitlement? As I stood on what was once my cherished patch of earth, now an asphalt jungle of cookie-cutter houses, I couldn't believe the audacity of the HOA under Karen Fletcher's iron-fisted rule. There they were, those prefabricated monuments to mediocrity, sprouting like weeds, all while I was off serving my country. I could almost hear Steve, the erstwhile schoolteacher turned construction supervisor, clanking his hard hat as he directed his minions to swing their bulldozers merrily through what remained of my gardens. A perfect community, they claimed, while I cringed at the graveyard of roses that now lay reduced to churned mud and shredded dreams. Who knew that land theft would involve a marching band of entitlement wrapped in pastel blazers? I internally cursed the HOA as I set my determination to defend my property rights with the zeal of a rookie football player in the playoffs. "So, what's the plan, Jamie?" Dave asked with a grin as we convened in my recently commandeered backyard, a mere remnant of its former self, strewn with errant pebbles and the scent of injustice. "You can't just stand there while Karen and her brigade walk all over you. You've got to show them they picked the wrong woman to mess with." My loyal camera-shy partner in crime was right. Instead of wallowing in despair and muttering to my reflection, I needed to unleash the fury of my environmental scientist brain. "How about turning their well water into a bubbly brew of undrinkable fun?" I suggested with barely contained excitement. Dave leaned back, eyes sparkling with mischief, and declared, "I love it. Let's just make sure we don't accidentally turn it into a swamp. I'd rather not have alligators prancing about." The spark of inspiration washed over me like a refreshing mountain stream, or more accurately, like a splash of lukewarm, chlorinated pool water. With my hidden reservoir of knowledge about the local aquifer, I theorized a plan to reroute the water supply directly into their water lines. My ultimate goal was to create a cocktail of earthy delights that could only be described as a fragrant fertilizer. Thankfully, with Dave's plumbing expertise, we quickly mapped out a flowchart that looked suspiciously like an abstract art piece gone rogue. I imagined Karen Fletcher sipping a glass of what was essentially rusty old swamp water, blissfully ignorant that she'd ever dared lay claim to my property. "All right, Operation Stinky Water is officially unauthorized but fully inspired," I announced, brandishing a shovel like it was a trophy during a post-match celebration. It felt like I was a knight preparing for battle, ready to defend my territory against the dragon that was the overly ambitious HOA. I chuckled to myself over the image of Karen sipping on her first glass of the liquid gold, and then being overcome by the soul-crushing realization that her lavish lifestyle had just hit a serious snag. I felt justified as I dug up a patch of dirt on the border of my property and began the transformation. Here's to karma, I thought, stirring the pot while plotting the return of my once peaceful kingdom. The days blurred into one another as my humorous battle against Karen's rule heightened. I became a neighborhood legend of sorts. The intrepid woman who dared to declare war on the HOA with nothing but a shovel, determination, and a wicked sense of humor. I found solitary enjoyment in the ridiculousness of the situation. Pictures of the eruption of bad smells and poor water quality would flood the neighborhood's scandalized Facebook page, right next to another from Karen's insistence on strict property maintenance standards. Maybe one day they'd have a picture of poor Karen, fish-eyed and bewildered at what had happened to her beloved spotless lawns. Ah, sweet irony. As I settled in for the night, exhausted but exhilarated from a day's work of mischief, I couldn't help but think how surreal this absurd drama had become. Who would have thought that my transition from overseas service to DIY rebellion would include plotting the ultimate revenge? The tiny spark of joy in watching the HOA's gradual downfall as they discovered my well water sabotage almost made me feel guilty. Almost. But as an environmental scientist, I found solace in balance. Every action has a reaction, and in this case, the reaction was going to be downright poetic when it came to Karen and her henchman's water supply. I leaned back, closed my eyes in contemplation, the future of my property bubbling with potential, until another thought occurred to me. Could they truly handle my undrinkable creation? Suddenly, I had a wild, inspiring thought that made me bolt upright. What if my adventure didn't just end with smelly water? What if I could rally the entire neighborhood, expose the HOA's sketchy dealings, and restore my rightful property to its verdant glory? I could create a community garden, or even an eco-park. The sheer possibility energizing me was electrifying as I imagined 200 neighbors banding together under the banner of revolt against entitlement. There's nothing quite like the buildup of a good plot twist, and I was certainly here for it. What if the ultimate return of justice was just around the corner? Fueled by a newfound zeal for neighborhood justice, I dove headfirst into planning my grand uprising, quite literally channeling my inner green thumb warrior. I scoured the property records to catch a glimpse of the HOA's shady dealings. As I leafed through documents that made Dr. Seuss's The Lorax seem like a calm Tuesday afternoon, I couldn't help but marvel at Karen's audacity. My once pristine gardens had been transformed into a jungle of concrete, and yet the real crime was the fine print, clause after clause hiding the renovation of rights underneath a pile of bureaucratic nonsense. I could see it now. The HOA reserves the right to ruin your life while selling you on community beautification. All proceeds go to Karen's next vacation fund. The sheer absurdity had me laughing so hard I nearly tipped over my compost bin. Last Tuesday, I barely stifled my giggles watching the Facebook group explode with horror after my first taste of sulfur-laden revenge hit their faucets. "Water tastes funny," they wrote in collective dismay. Shades of brown and green that would make a baby poop look elegant flowed out of their taps, giving new meaning to the phrase natural spring water. I savored every digital complaint and twirled in glee, as visions of the HOA's terrifying Vice President Germain trying to scrub his water pipes with organic lemon juice danced in my mind. Picture it, a middle-aged man along the lines of Jerry from accounting trying to cleanse his water supply, only to create what can only be described as a stinky art installation right in his kitchen. Honestly, all I needed was a pretense of Environmental Awareness Week, and I could host an HOA recycling theme party. The ultimate revenge with organic snacks and free fertilizer samples. Next, I decided to put a more concrete plan into action. Literally, my goal was to host a community meeting under the guise of discussing homeowner concerns while stealthily promoting awareness of the HOA's underhanded tactics. Armed with some homemade flyers that were more artistic than legal, I plastered my community with invitations featuring a whimsical plant graphic, a catchy title, and the somewhat misleading slogan, "No more swamp water, only fresh ideas." Dave assisted with his printing prowess, expertly choosing colors that screamed both genius and a need for urgency. Underneath it all, I cackled with delight, fully aware that Karen would likely show up to remove the flyers in horror, only to find that the locals were already hip to her manipulative game. A veritable Trojan horse of grassroots rebellion. As the day of reckoning approached, I took a moment to admire my handiwork. I could scarcely contain my excitement at the thought of what would happen next. People would arrive for a friendly discussion about water safety, unaware that it was actually an enormous community gathering. I envisioned them gathering in my backyard under the twinkling fairy lights, sipping organic lemonade while listening to my fiery manifesto against the HOA. Dave, my trusty partner in crime, would dab his eyes in mock amazement as I delivered a speech that would make Martin Luther King Jr. proud, but with a touch more snark, of course. "I have a dream," I opened, "that one day Karen Fletcher will sip a fresh glass of organic lemonade, not the coffee-like sludge spewing from her precious grant-funded pipes." A chorus of laughter would ripple through the crowd, drowning out any lingering doubts of social decorum. And so, the fateful evening arrived, teeming with hope, mischief, and a few misplaced expectations. Unsurprisingly, half of the attendees were curious retirees, ready to gossip within my makeshift community space and dive straight into juicy HOA dramas. Karen, still blissfully unaware of her imminent embarrassment, meandered in with the usual air of superiority. She halted when she spotted me brainstorming Plumbing 101 in doodles and sketches, the triumphant grin plastered on my face. With all the grace of a gazelle, I walked among my neighbors, inviting them to share their grievances before I struck with the grand reveal. Maybe this was redemption after all. Or perhaps it was just high tea with a side of revenge and a delectable cupcake of truth. As the chatter grew, I sensed a heightened energy in the crowd. It felt like a powder keg, ready to burst at the seams. Old tensions flared like embers catching fire in a quiet, dry forest. I leaned into the chaos, casting my spells of intrigue as I unveiled a bottle of Karen's water sample and the origins of its rank potion. The reactions were priceless, not just for the pure shock, but for Karen's eyes widen as realization dawned, accompanied by an almost cartoonish gasp. The irony of her pristine community crumbling beneath her feet was delicious enough to savor. Right before my very eyes, shoulders turned, and expressions morphed from disbelief into smug delight as the entire neighborhood united over the shared goal of expelling the HOA and restoring our right to natural living. "Ladies and gentlemen," I cried, sweeping my arm grandly across the crowd, Are we to be ruled by Karen Fletcher and her minions, or shall we reclaim our community as nature intended below our manicured lawns? The applause that followed created a wave of euphoria that drowned out any remaining whispers of doubt. They needed reminding that the power didn't lie within a flashy podium or clipboard. No, it lay with us, the vibrant souls of the neighborhood. And if I had to serve up a taste of undrinkable reality to shatter complacency, so be it. Who knew that uprising could feel so liberating? The night promised to burst open with possibilities, and I could barely contain the whirlwind the story was becoming. After all, what's more entertaining than an environmentally conscious revolt against a pasty blonde aspiring princess? The evening air was electric, buzzing like a beehive in springtime. I glanced around my backyard, eyeing the wobbly tables borrowed from Dave and the mismatched chairs that lent a certain charm, if charm was defined by what you'd find at a yard sale arranged by an overloaded college student. My neighbors were here, gathered in earnest, their faces a tapestry of bemusement and curiosity as I prepared to unload a metaphorical dumpster fire on the HOA. We will show them, I thought gleefully, the true meaning of neighborhood unity, possibly with a side of guerrilla gardening. With notes in hand and a smirk that could rival the Cheshire Cat's, I was ready to unleash my inner activist poster girl. It felt good to have power for once. Not just power over my compost pile, but real, community-driven momentum. Then came Karen Fletcher, strutting in like a peacock on a mission. The way she glided through the crowd, perfectly coiffed and clad in a pastel suit that could only be described as royally obnoxious, made my heart race with equal parts disdain and delight. Here she was, the self-proclaimed queen of conformity, exuding entitlement with every overconfident step. In that moment, I recognized a wild glint in my eye reflected in the gathering shadows. When Karen shuffled towards my table, her gaze fell on my hastily lettered sign reading, "No more swamp water," and I swear I could almost hear the gears clicking in her well-oiled brain, spinning out a multitude of conclusions that would do the best mystery novels justice. Would she confront me about my anti-community sentiments? Or perhaps she'd start quizzing me on plumbing works and the biochemical makeup of undrinkable water? Ah, the anticipation was delicious. I began the proceedings with an exaggerated flourish, urging my unsuspecting audience to take a seat while surreptitiously sneaking a peek at Karen's body language. "Welcome, everyone. Tonight we sip lemonade," I said, raising my glass high, "and pour over some disturbing truths about our beloved community." Laughter erupted, and my confidence soared like a hot air balloon. As the crowd settled, I pulled out the sacrilegious bottle of foul liquid that had been floating ominously in Karen's water lines. The crowd gasped, my theatrical reveal met with an array of faces, shock, disbelief, and a touch of humor, painting them like a skilled artist at work. "You ever taste something so bad it could drive your house cat into therapy?" I quipped, and the audience erupted in a riot of laughter. Sweet, sweet revulsion underlined by the familiar comfort of shared humor. With every and I let linger, anticipation thickened in the air like the smell of burnt popcorn at a bad movie. "Picture this," I said, pacing back and forth like an impassioned preacher. "Our homes represent tranquility, the utmost convenience, yet our access to clean water is profoundly compromised, thanks to our beloved HOA." At that moment, the crowd began murmuring, the collective incredulity morphing into indignation. No one has to drink funky swamp juice when we have the power to change what comes out of those hellish taps. I struck my dramatic pose again, the chaos unraveling as if I were some sort of eco-warrior avenging the oppression of community rights. As Karen's expression morphed from bemusement to fury, I could practically see cartoon thunderclouds forming above her perfectly styled head. From there, I leaned in for the kill, delivering truths with more fervor than I'd ever mustered in my science career. "This isn't just about a few gag-inducing sips, friends. It's about our autonomy against a dictatorship veiled in pastel." I scanned the room, seizing their wide-eyed reactions like a hunter capturing the biggest game. Dave outdid himself at that point, sliding in with comical interjections about serious chlorine levels and a line item for bentonite mud. The audience thrived on this banter, laughing while secretly homing in on a shared determination, newfound alliances forming thick in the perfumed air of rebellion. Was it possible they were finally awakening? Could the seeds of resistance I was sowing sprout into an organic threat against Karen's tyrannical methods? And just when I thought I had completely hijacked the room, Karen finally interjected, her voice ringing out like a tyrant's decree. "This is absurd, Jamie," she proclaimed, her platinum bob quizzically bouncing with each word. "Our endeavors were about unity, progress for the sake of a perfect neighborhood." Oh, how I savored that moment, the irony dripping from her lips like the bumpy water I was now about to expose as the neighborhood's true failure. I wanted to say, "Do you really believe utopia can be built on the back of stagnant water, Karen?" Instead, I merely leaned forward, grinning like a mischievous child caught with their hand in the cookie jar. "Oh, Karen, sweet Karen, tell me, how has perfection treated us thus far?" It was like watching a soap opera unfold live, and the spectators were crushingly entertained. With cheers rippling through the crowd, the conviction solidified and resonated louder than the HOA's insistent drone about community standards. These glorious folks had all but taken up pitchforks and taken to the proverbial streets outside, ready to run circles around conformity's flag because they were officially fired up. The fire pit crackled in the background, but the heat from our shared outrage felt even more potent. Let us unite, make noise, sip organic lemonade, drink what we deserve, not what they've forced down our throats. Hands shot up, a multitude of suggestions bubbling forth, and the absurdity of Karen Fletcher being outnumbered in her own domain washed over me in waves of euphoric delight. So, this was how a community could rise from the ashes of bland compliance. Hilarity paired with righteous indignation had birthed something extraordinary. And as Karen's demeanor shifted, from outrage to embarrassment, frazzling in real time, I realized my audience was hungry for more than just lemonade and laughter. This was a moment etched into the very fabric of community, and I was but its harbinger, ready to ignite the flames of change that Karen had tried so diligently to snuff out. I closed my speech with a flourish, standing tall, unity ablaze, and proclaimed, "Tonight we are not just homeowners but a collective force, ready to reclaim what is ours. Who's with me?" The crescendo of voices replying echoed like an anthem of belief. A pact forged beneath the stars with laughter and a sprinkle of outrage united as we stepped firmly towards our collective victory. What a night this would continue to be. The battle to reclaim our community had sparked. Were we ready to win this war? The electric energy in the backyard crackled like an impending summer storm, vibrant with a tension that threatened to explode. Or was that just the echo of my own enthusiasm? With each cheer from my neighbors, I reveled in the exhilarating sensation of activism, buoyed by their collective hope for change. Karen Fletcher, meanwhile, was transforming into a high-strung marionette, every twitch of her jaw a dramatic manifestation of her internal turmoil. I relished the power dynamics swirling about me, and the ridiculous notions that exploded from my mind like the confetti of a poorly planned party. What if we formed a Citizens for Clean Water Committee? I mused, throwing it out to the crowd, who rose to the suggestion like a bakery's fresh loaf. We could even have t-shirts. It was an immediate triumph of laughter, and I swore I saw Karen's eye twitch in response. Dave, ever the practical counterpart to my relentless idealism, was already scribbling down ideas for our nascent movement, along with a few snarky jabs. Next up, a petition for HOA refund for every cubic inch of swamp water they've forced down our throats, he quipped, eliciting further laughter. He waved his arms around theatrically as if conducting an orchestra of revolt, leading us into a hallowed vision of inciting action against the oppressive rules imposed by Karen and her merry band of HOA enforcers. Can you imagine? Clean water, happy neighbors emblazoned across the front, with an eye-catching design of a floating inflatable alligator. I was nearly choking from laughing at the visual. The crowd's enthusiasm surged, mirroring my own outrageous ideas, and I secretly congratulated myself for lighting this proverbial bonfire of revolution. Then came the most amusing part, Karen's increasingly frantic attempts to regain control over her flailing kingdom. "This is ridiculous. You cannot simply waltz in here, wave around your ideas like a silly flag, and expect legitimacy," she shouted, her poised facade crumbling faster than a cookie under the weight of our collective will. "Please, Karen," I shot back, pretending to yank an invisible string from my back pocket, as if mimicking her string-pulling abilities. "A little exaggeration goes a long way. Don't we all want our very own water features to be less of a biohazard crisis?" The crowd erupted, laughter erupting like popcorn in a microwave, and I basked in their camaraderie, the bonds forged under the shared conviction that we were not just homeowners, we were warriors fighting for our rights. It was like watching a sitcom unfold in real time, her meticulously styled hair frizzing ever so slightly with each exaggerated gesture, while our gathering boomed with the conviction of comrades. Those who think they can stifle creativity and community spirit will be met with the full force of— I paused for dramatic effect, letting the tension settle, our unwavering commitment to reclaim our dignity. A resounding cheer erupted, booming through the quiet neighborhood, echoing like a rallying cry of a band of misfits ready to turn the tide against the despot of pastel-hued oppression. Karen's increasingly absurd protests were drowned out by what felt like the construction of a grassroots tsunami. Her face morphed from crimson to pale as she realized we were a collective force, no longer naive marionettes, in her game of HOA domination. But Karen's absurd denial of our growing rebellion ignited a stronger sense of purpose within me. "Listen, folks," I called, my arms raised high, each gesture filled with determination. "This isn't simply about smelly water. It's about standing up for our rights. It's about saying enough is enough." Hoots and hollers of agreement rippled through the crowd as I tapped into my inner environmental scientist, now aptly transformed into a battle-ready figure of justice and righteousness. No more shall we be at the mercy of a board that wipes the floor with our voices, our histories, and our rights as homeowners. The HOA works for us, not the other way around. The momentum felt palpable, pushing me forward like a freight train barreling through the tracks. I could already envision a new community project where we took up gardening to ensure our own food security, or a neighborhood sports league just for the hell of it. Just as I thought we had reached a crescendo, Karen stilled the crowd with a frantic motion, pulling out her smart device to access the HOA regulations. "You think you can stand against me?" she gasped, her tone verging on melodrama. "I have the legal backing. I got on the board for a reason. You all are playing with fire," the crowd murmured uncertainly, not quite getting the absurdity of it all. I couldn't resist the moment. The thought of Karen's self-important pomp was irresistibly amusing, and I dove into the moment without a second thought. Oh yes, because nothing says community justice quite like building your legacy on the sins of swampy altruism. I gestured at the outrageously uninviting bottle of water I'd brought, aiming my jab like a contestant in a gladiatorial arena. "Karen, sweetheart, you're dictating a system that's already decayed, and we're simply here to clean house." In the chaos of laughter and uprising, one nagging thought crept into my mind. This fight could expand beyond just the water issue. As I observed the growing bonds within the crowd, I realized we had inadvertently begun constructing a symbiotic hive, much like our bees buzzing nearby, reclaiming their territory and ensuring their survival. The absurdity of the night transformed into a wake-up call, a metamorphosis from apathetic residents to empowered citizens, all fueled by the passion to stand against entitlement. How many more absurdities lay in wait for us? What outlandish ideas could we hatch next? And in the bright glow of that summer evening, I started to think that maybe, that night, something extraordinary was brewing for this little patch of paradise. Would every HOA member in our newly unified legion be brave enough to step forward and join hands against the constraints of conformity? The laughter that erupted from our makeshift rally felt like a spiritual awakening, my soul getting a much-needed lift as I reveled in the absurd comedy of our rebellion. It was official. The HOA's clutches on our dreams were being loosened like a tight waistband after Thanksgiving dinner. If Karen thought she could cave us in with legal jargon and her impressive collection of pastel blazers, she was in for a surprise. The crowd had morphed from fearful inhabitants, resigned to Karen's tyranny, into a raucous band of revolutionaries, ready to snatch their voices back from the clutches of her pearl-adorned fist. As I stood tall, urging us forward, my vision for a new neighborhood rose like a phoenix from the ashes of conformity. What it really needed, I realized, was a superior villain. Enter stage left, the infamous waterline, or as I like to call it, the Pond of Despair. With each flourish of my hands, I could already see the Pond of Despair becoming our rallying cry, and alongside the citizens and Dave, my trusty sidekick, we concocted slogans and antics the likes of which Karen had never weathered before. "The swamp wars have begun," I declared dramatically, brandishing my imaginary sword. "And only the brave shall find true hydration in these perilous waters." Dave chimed in with an exaggerated nod and a truly ridiculous accent, pretending to be the voice of the local damsel in distress, crying out from the edge of the swamp for a hero to save her from sadness, before a spout of laughter erupted from the gathered neighbors. It was absurdity at its finest. The audacity of our plight was becoming an unstoppable comedic force, and a flicker of something deep within the crowd hinted. We were English-speaking citizens of the HOA turned circus performers, juggling our lives between compliance and the ludicrous pursuit of water. Of course, while summoning laughter and camaraderie, the other end of the spectrum existed. The serious, menacing Karen Fletcher was not just an HOA president. She was on a rampage. I could almost see her gears turning in that sharply styled platinum bob, plotting revenge amidst her ongoing exasperation. She had faced petty battles before, but something told me she hadn't anticipated an uprising of this magnitude. This wasn't going to be her typical minutes of the meeting fiascos. I could feel the stormy clouds of frustration brewing like an ominous thundercloud over her perfectly manicured lawn. I leaned over to Dave, whispering conspiratorially, "Do you think we should get her a stress reduction kit for when she implodes?" Dave snort laughed and shot back, "With one of those stress balls shaped like a water droplet?" "Absolutely. But only if it comes with a free packet of understanding neighborly behavior." Yet, in the height of our comedic turmoil, Karen seized her moment. She stormed up like an opera diva at the climax of the show, hands flailing as she howled, "This insurrection is nothing short of anarchy. I've got half a mind to call the police." A moment of silence blanketed the crowd, only to be punctured by Dave's unhinged laughter, whose giggles rapidly spread into a tidal wave that enveloped the entire gathering. "What's next, Karen?" He shot back, spitting out words like water balloons. "Are you planning to file a restraining order against the pond? We're about to start an official choose-your-own-water adventure, right in your back do." "Dave?" I interjected, holding back a fit of giggles. "Let's keep the drama to the high seas, shall we?" The laughter rang on, echoing our newfound audacity, while Karen's face vibrated through an array of colors, all while she indicated that her simmering rage was very much within reach. In the middle of all this hubbub, something shifted within me, a surge of realization that this was well beyond simple water rights or an HOA dispute. This was about the essence of community. As I gazed into the faces of my neighbors, the laughter was a reminder that painful truths could become a united force. Inspired, I took a step forward, hands framing my determined stance. "This is just the beginning. We deserve more than legalized oppression. It's time to unite as neighbors, not under Karen's dictation, but as collaborators echoing our cries for better systems." I could feel the urgency building within each of us, a mix of hilarious misunderstandings and genuine intentions rising in harmony. Who could have fathomed that our desire for clean water could ignite such fervor? Karen, seemingly grasping the futility of her endeavors, halted in her fury-stricken tracks, faced now a mix between desperation and disbelief. I couldn't help but smile at the sight of her refusing to acknowledge how ridiculous this entire debacle had grown, as she danced dangerously close to losing all sense of composure. "You say that now, but you're crossing a line. If you can't see the seriousness of this situation, you're signing your doom," she exclaimed, veins practically popping out of her neck. My resolve felt unshakable, the thrill of freedom coursing through my veins like an exhilarating burst of caffeine. "Oh, Karen, we do see it," I replied, voice steady and strong, recalling every drop of swampy water that set this ruckus into motion. "And we're ready to drink it dry. Who's with me?" A wave of cheers burst forth as we raised our voices united, a troop of advocates swinging ravaging swords of hope and humor. I could visualize the future, a thriving community where our voices mattered, where we, not Karen, controlled the reign of our homes. Just as I was envisioning the magnificent pie charts that would convey our victories in terms of water quality improvements versus Karen's dramatic meltdowns, Dave nudged my shoulder with a grin. Who knew a water line could start this level of chaos? "What's next? Mock water taste tests." We both dissolved into laughter, buoyed by the camaraderie of our neighbors who joined us in celebrating the absurdity of our plight. The sun was setting low, casting an orange hue across our blooming rebellion as I thought about all the potential. How could we transform this newly forged village against Karen? What were the next steps to officialize our uprising into a legitimate campaign? The bubbling energy shifted the air, suggesting something monumental was just a spark away. Would we become warriors armed not just with humor and defiance, but with unstoppable planning? As the cheers faded, the palpable tension in the room rippled with an absurd energy that could slap a grin on even the grumpiest of neighbors. I stood there, breathing in the euphoria of our newfound unity while trying to shake off the jitters that buzzed in my stomach. "All right, my people," I shouted, thrusting my fist into the air like a true leader of this glorious rebellion. "This waterline debacle is more than just a battle for our liquid gold. It's a fight against the tyranny of a power-crazed pastel overlord." The cheering crescendoed into an almost cult-like fervor, and I momentarily reveled in the role of neighborhood prophet, a melodramatic flair to my otherwise environmentally conscious existence. Tonight, we turn our laughter into action. Yet amidst all this uproar, I could hear Karen's distress grow louder, punctuating the scene with her need for control. As the mocking laughter faded slightly, conditioned by her cutthroat glare that could slice through steel, I spotted Dave elbowing a few neighbors to crowd around his old pressurized water canister. now transformed into a symbolic relic of our struggle. Permits? Who needs permits when you have this trusty contraption, he bellowed, waving it like a trophy snatched from the hands of a foe. There was dynamism in the air as neighbors swapped incredulous glances. Little did they know, this wasn't just a battle for their homes, it was a battleground for reclaiming dignity, right there in the blazing spotlight of absurdity. I thought HOA battles only happened in movies, or like, on Instagram, one of our newer neighbors exclaimed, wide-eyed and half-amused. But never did I expect it to be about actual swamps! Laughter erupted once more. Even Karen was caught off guard by the mix of enthusiasm bubbling around me. That's right, Nancy, I beamed. You didn't sign up for a horror story, but you sure got one anyways. Oh, the irony. A neighborhood birthed not from a fight against blight, but an internal strife over swill. It occurred to me so poignantly how craftily we gripped the gears of fortune from the clutches of this unruly HOA monster. While I set the map towards a clean water future, I propose we brand ourselves as environmental superheroes. What do we say to the notion of starting our very own Save Our Swamp campaign? That one bold suggestion unleashed a torrent of hilarious suggestions and ideas. Ideas ranged from Swamp Awareness Month to peculiar competitions like Swim in the Sulphur. Much to my delight, the laughter returned, and our neighbors began tossing around wild notions that celebrated the absurdity of our plight. Positioning myself as the ringmaster of this unpredictable circus, I sculpted our enthusiasm into action. Ladies and gentlemen, to aid our cause, we shall organize glorious events and create eco-friendly tickle traps for Karen. The Pond of Despair will become synonymous with fun, camaraderie, and collective action against tyranny. I barely contained the excitement bubbling over within me, feeling the room snatching the spark of rebellion that had ignited in my heart and letting it set fire to their imaginations. The pivotal Pond of Despair seal of approval took form that evening, and our core team of advocates grew, each neighbor contributing their own talents and quirks, painting a portrait that would make even Picasso weep with joy or confusion. I chuckled at my newfound comrades. There was Joan, the retired teacher concocting water-themed educational games, and Tim, the self-proclaimed tech guru, proposing a live-stream event dubbed Swamp Monster Showdown. And Karen? She was brewing in the background, her frustrated huffs punctuating our high spirits like pesky hornets buzzing round. The best part? We were absolutely, unequivocally, adorably unserious about it. A clown car of absurdity, I whispered to Dave, who nodded before stifling a laugh. All that comedic chaos was not lost on Karen, whose anxious demeanor resembled a poodle stuck in a washing machine. The very sight of her exasperation fueled our resolve, and with each creative blow, we dismantled the aura of her authority brick by brick. "Ah, Karen, want my pièce de résistance for you?" I teased, waving a ridiculous sign that proclaimed, "Swamptopia awaits, a better neighborhood. How's that for tyranny?" I chortled, while she merely scowled, the frustration palpable as she responded with yet another round of muttering about how dismal this mess had become. The irony of the moment came in waves, each with its own rib-tickling jest, pushing the bounds of her sanity in an undeniably delightful way. And so, the stage was set for an emergency HOA meeting the following week, a gathering to rival the gladiatorial contests of old, where Dave would show up with his plumbing expertise while I would grace the audience with my pointed retorts. The whole thing felt electric as anticipation charged the air. I envisioned the faces of our neighbors, each ready to rat out Phil and his dubious property management practices during my carefully curated sting operation disguised amidst our farcical agenda. Standing before the HOA members with fists raised high, I mentally prepared myself for comedic quips meant to tear down the absurdity of the situation while emboldening our cause. Could the Pond of Despair turn into Swampapalooza? A critique wrapped in pure hilarity. The notion made me giddy with excitement. The unbeatable spirit of camaraderie was at our fingertips, and I was ready. Bring it on, Karen. The following week exploded into action, the air thick with the scent of panic and the excitement of rebellion as we prepped for the showdown of the century. The emergency HOA meeting that would either doom us to Karen's pastel tyranny or elevate us into a realm of neighborhood legends. I strutted into the makeshift arena, the community center, armed with nothing but my bravado and a presentation titled, "The Imminent Doom of Our Aquatic Freedom." Oh yes, I had charts, graphs, and even a PowerPoint that would make a middle school teacher shed a tear of envy. Dave was working the crowd like a pro, engaged in an impromptu plumbing cue, that had our neighbors both chuckling and spreading a layer of grassroots solidarity to size up against the looming pastel wall of oppression. As the lights dimmed for my presentation, the atmosphere thickened with expectant energy. I stepped on stage, striking a dramatic pose as I slid my glasses down my nose, like a superhero revealing their true identity. Ladies and gentlemen, gather round. Let's talk about the water we're drinking, or more accurately, the water we're not drinking. My neighbors erupted in laughter as I clicked through slides, showcasing the scientific marvel of what our LLC, lovely liquid of chaos, had become. A gas mask hung humorously from my belt, a nod to the odors emanating from our drinking supply, while I comically labeled the water quality pyramid as things the HOA did not want you to see. I feel like a master conductor orchestrating a symphony of hilarity. Every shake, every glance of disbelief from Karen made me strike each note more profoundly. It was a theatrical performance worthy of a five-star review. Karen, seated as the queen of the pastel court, sat shaking her head, her perfectly coiffed platinum bob bobbing in rhythm with every absurdity that left my lips. With each ridiculous analogy, this water is so foul it could probably power a haunted house. Her frustration morphed into something profoundly spectacular. My neighbors were fully immersed in the hilarity, raising eyebrows and sharing furtive glances as we portrayed our dramatic narrative of oppression and triumph. I even broke out the infamous Swamp of Tortured Souls meme, the faces of our neighbors layered over cartoon alligators swirling in the odorous waters, losing it when I referenced poor Dave's hilarious blog post that had festered online, rendering him the accidental swamp celebrity. Who knew the depths of this debacle could yield such unexpected fame? Then, suddenly suspended in a moment of clarity, I turned to Karen, who sat with her mouth slightly agape. You see, Karen, I leaned in like a villain, revealing their dastardly plan. It's not just about the sulfur in our pipes. It's about how you, with your upscale sunglasses and high and mighty emotions, have steamrolled over our rights. You've built a bubble of entitlement that bursts with every rancid drop of water. Wouldn't it be rather unconventional for a leader to listen to the people? Like, just imagine. The laughter was electric, like a live wire traveling through the crowd. I saw it, the glimmer of realization dawning upon the others as they collectively softened under the absurdity of her 12-step plan for a perfect lawn. My words were the comedy primer for the audience's rebellion, lifting us further into an atmosphere thick with solidarity. As the meeting progressed, I stoked the flames of our collective outrage, setting the audience on fire with laughter, while simultaneously igniting a series of impassioned speeches from my neighbors. Let's not let Phil's incompetence ruin our homes, Joan shouted, pushing forth a campaign to issue a vote of no confidence. Right? I cheered, throwing my hand over my heart in an exaggerated gesture of allegiance. He's turned us into his personal scientific experiment, rendering us human test subjects in this unholy water fiasco. Whenever Karen's eyebrows climbed higher, it felt as though they aimed to touch the chandelier, and the contagious laughter and relentless absurdity spiraled higher into a charming tornado of revolt. Finally, driven by unquenchable enthusiasm, the time reached its crescendo. Let's call it, people, I declared, standing tall and feeling like a true leader of a hilarious revolution. It's time for us to demand answers. Our beloved Phil has demonstrated an appalling lack of regard for our concerns. Is every bathroom break around here going to be a journey into the depths of swamp gates? The crowd erupted in a synchronized cheer, and I could see defeat radiating from Karen, her frustration nearly visible in the air, swirling around us like a bad scent from the very water we so humorously loathed. With enthusiasm ablaze, the voices of dissent echoed as one by one. They rose to support the motion to unseat Phil, the puppet master of HOA tyranny. As the meeting roared with the sound of unified laughter and revolt, Karen's vibe shifted dramatically. I won't allow this blatant, this complete, unnecessary injustice, she sputtered, her carefully polished facade crumbling onto itself as her voice climbed an octave reminiscent of an agitated parakeet. Rather than cower, we embraced the chaos. Cheers ensued in support of our decision, united in the shared understanding that we were, indeed, the masters of our plight. I'd like to believe I saw the light of realization flicker in her pristine blonde locks, a moment of clarity breaking through like the dawn after a long, sulphurous night. The momentum was on our side. Could it be that the day of the pastel overlord's doom loomed close? Could Karen be unmasked from her throne of entitlement? Would the newly dubbed Swamp Avengers transform the tides for good? The cheers of the crowd enveloped me like a warm hug, resonating with a level of absurdity that we all needed just to survive, alongside the promise of a neighborly reformation. There, in that jubilant, raucous meeting, we realized that justice might be wobbly, much like our water, but together it could become something refreshingly triumphant, even hilariously unstoppable. Had we really just cracked the formula for a revolution while surrounded by houseplants and disgruntled house pets? Honestly, it felt like the best kind of nonsense. Who knew that taking down a pastel overlord could be equal parts triumphant and silly?